Hudson hard mode at Hudson's at Island. That's where it all started.
And what year was that?
And you know, that was 1976, the year after I got out of high school. And you couldn't keep me away from that place.
Yeah? And what was that like?
Freddie, you were there in 1975, huh?
I was there in 74 and 75.
Yeah. And Mike was there the whole time.
The entire time I was there.
Yeah, me too.
Who were your early influences in that setting over there as far as your board building went?
Pink Floyd. B-Dub. I had to say Brian Waters. Not only was he a great shaper and surfer, but he was just a master innovator of everything. I'm sure he is today too.
And was there any particular designs you were partial to back then, or that or was there?
Well, B-Dub's egg shapes, which at the time we didn't have any exposure to Skip Fry stuff. And then after I finished working at Hudson's, that's when I started. Yancey had come back with about a dozen of Skip Fry's personal boards. And I had gone to Hatteras that year, and John Stack and Tom Hudson and a bunch of us had bought those boards and went to Cape Hatteras. And that's just where everything changed.
And what was the significance about those versus some of the other things?
Just they were the first. Well, the wide points were kind of back a little bit, which over time everything got faster and more maneuverable when everybody started widening the tails and pulling the wide points back a little bit. I got to tell you, Skip Fry's boards were beautiful, but his outlines were outstanding. And I always thought I could put my special touches on his outlines, and you'd really have some.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it, man.
And how's that worked out? When you were in Pensacola in the early 70s, what was the culture like then versus maybe over the years, the 80s, 90s? Today, obviously you're not here, but what was it like?
I don't know. I lived that early Pensacola Beach thing with Mike Pratt, Beezer Turner, and we all hung out together. But I started going down to the East Coast and seeing how much more spread out it was and how much longer the waves were and how much longer the rides were. And I had to have it.
Why not Cali?
Well, here I was only a day's drive away from home, which I still considered here to be home, which I kind of still do now, I guess, with the folks and all. That California is just, I tried that. In fact, I went out there with Dirk to explore, trying to move out there and everything. And there's nowhere to park. It was too crowded, too expensive, and I just knew right then, I can't break into this. But when I was down in Melbourne, man, I just walked right into it.
And speaking of breaking into it, what was your big break into the shaping surfboards? I remember when you did your first board, Rock Lobster, but what was your big break with shaping boards, and when did you know you could make a living doing it?
What happened is I started off as an airbrusher at Mike Tabling's, and I was airbrushing about 5 or 6 boards a day and telling Mike, you need to let me start shaping some boards. And then he got really mad at one of the shapers who wasn't coming into work, and then one day he just handed me a bunch of order forms and said, shape these boards, and I never looked back.
And from Tabling's Spectrum, did you end up in
Spectrum? No, I went from there. I went to another factory on Merritt Island. These guys just pulled up in the parking lot one day when I was standing there, and they said, man, we need some help. And it was Jeff Haney and Bob Tate at Ocean Image. And so I went over and started working with those guys, which they were much better business people. They were there every day and taking care of business every day. Like Mike would come in and he'd run the business, but then he'd take off for a week or two selling boards, which is what his specialty was. And so there was nobody there calling the shots for a week. And then he'd show back up, and but these guys were there every day. And that's where I met Bobby Webb, who owns Action Surfboards. And he was strong in those days in the Carolinas. And so I ended up shaping those. I did water weapons for Hickson's in Jacksonville. And then I was doing boards for guys just in the neighborhood in the Atlantic Boardwalk.
And that Mike Tabling, he wasn't a very good surfer, huh?
He was, he's quite the guy.
Uh-huh. What was it like to have to compete with a guy like that out in the water?
I tell you what, one day a fisherman, we were at the inlet, and a fisherman casted his line and his sinker hit about a foot away from Mike. And he just pushed his board in towards the beach and climbed up the rocks and climbed up the jetty and grabbed this guy and threw him off the jetty. And I don't know who was hurt more, the guy who got thrown off or just hurt my feelings just to see it. That was a scary time.
Oh, different world.
Of course, Jeff Crawford ruled First Peak in those days.
Yeah?
But you didn't mess with Mike Tabling.
And what was it like, when did you move to Spectrum and start really getting into the production?
Well, I lived right there in the Atlantic Boardwalk when Spectrum was right there. Mm-hmm. And those were all my friends and everything. And their factory was where my factory is now, on Tomahawk Drive in Indian Harbor Beach. And it was so much easier just to work there and go home and go back to work, go home, than to drive all the way to Merritt Island. Although I got to tell you, I had a little Fiat sports car that I had traded a board and a pair of speakers for. It was the little blue one. And I used to drive that thing up Tropical Trail, and it was just, that was half the fun of going to work, was the drive.
And how many boards did you shape at the peak at Spectrum? How many boards would you say you were producing when you were there?
I'm going to have to say, well, it kind of fluctuated a little bit, but we at one time, we were the largest one-label surfboard factory in the world. In total, there was about, I want to say between 4,000 and 5,000 boards a year coming out of that one factory. It was so big, we were buying fiberglass cloth by the pallet. And
how would that, you say that would compare to Merritt just a few years later? Was that comparable, or do you think that that maybe that's been surpassed? Do you think the 90s were bigger than the 80s as far as surfboard production?
I'm not really sure how things were done, how business was handled in California. All I know is how Florida. You asked me about Florida,
Sure.
I can tell you about Florida. And they just, we were one company with 5 shapers, and Al Merrick was just one guy who put his name on all the boards. Mm-hmm. So there's kind of a difference there. Mm-hmm.
Did you have any particular, over your career and your life, has there been any particular surfers that have just kind of had a major influence on the way you build boards, or people that just in general influenced you from their, what they
Well, I got to tell you, from being from Pensacola, Beezer Turner. And to this day, I mean to the last week, when I do a really good cutback, I'm going, I hope that was as good as a Beezer Turner cutback, because he was the king. And even though it's been so long since I've surfed with him or remember those days, that was probably one of the strongest things.